So for today's conversation, I thought it would help to start with a question. Many people who are trying to learn a language have the sense that they are weaker in one area than others, that they have a sort of Achilles heel when it comes to that language. Some people feel that they're very strong at grammar and reading and writing comprehension, but their speaking is the weakest thing. Other people feel like maybe their vocabulary or their understanding of some grammatical concept on the fly is weak. And people often want to target their weaknesses, understandably. People want to say, how do I improve this specific aspect, the specific weakness of mine? What do you think about that situation? You've maybe mentioned that your language approach might be a bit different. How would you go about handling a situation like this?
Well, I can understand why people might want that or need that at a specific instance. Sometimes I think that kind of whole approach of breaking languages down into sort of the four basic skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking is a real, it's a product of the educational testing system. And these are the things that can be tested and are tested and evaluated throughout our educational process. And so I think our minds sort of work, on the presupposition that these are actual skills. And when we are learning a foreign language, we can sort of separate what we're doing and try to focus on just one of those at a time. And as I said, there are occasions when that might be really necessary if you are up for some sort of a testing situation, and then you just knuckle down and do it. And if you want specific advice, I'm sure there are lots of programs and things out there that I don't use myself, but anybody searching, find me here on YouTube, you'll find lots of videos about how to improve your speaking, how to improve your listening, and you can get specific tips if you seek to do that. But yes, I do think that my whole approach to learning language is very different from that, and I don't like to break it down into those skills as much as I like to. More than even I want to approach it holistically. I just go at it from a totally different perspective and think that the skills of a language are things that you get when you know a language. They sort of are given to you. It's once you really learn a language, you're able to do these things. And if you don't really learn the language, you can't. And so what you need to do is really learn the language. And by that, I mean, go at it with a sort of a different attitude, a different approach to saying, well, if I can make my mind work on a different operating system, then I will just process the sounds that come from that operating system, and I'll be able to make them, and I'll be able to read them and do them. But the thing I really need to do is get my mind working on these other channels, or to reprogram it to think and function in another language. And so I think that whole process is really best done holistically, rather than breaking it down into individual parts, and by trying to understand languages perhaps in a different manner.
Can you say more about the specifics of what you call a holistic approach? It's clear that different language learning approaches can prioritize certain skills at the expense of others. You could do one of those conversational crash courses before visiting a new country that teaches you to make some conversation, but not to read or write very effectively. The way classical languages are often taught, you learn to write and to translate, but not at all to speak. Mm-hmm. What does your holistic method involve that doesn't end up prioritizing one of these skills over the others?
Well, I mean, yeah, just to pick up on what you just said, I mean, my experience with like Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit in university was not so much writing and translating, but just specifically what they called reading. What was very painstakingly looking everything up and analyzing everything, and that was just a very, very different process from reading, say, French, Spanish, or German. And I think the reason for that is because what you learn to do when you learn French, Spanish, or German is learn to think in French, Spanish, or German. For some reason, that was sort of seen as, people think that thinking perhaps is internalized speaking, or perhaps speech is externalized thought. The idea is that Latin is a dead language, so that you don't need to speak it, so we're going to work on that skill. We're just going to work on the reading skill, the analyzing skill. And the result is that different process of reading that was just much less satisfactory than reading a living language. there are instances, I think the extreme instances are with the East Asian languages, like a language like Japanese or Chinese, that there are people who say that I understand that even people who are, native Japanese or Chinese or Korean speakers spend a lot of time learning the characters that they write with. It takes a lot of many years to do that. And so I think there are people who would say, well, yes, it'd be nice if I could learn how to read and write Japanese or Chinese as well as speak it, but I can break those skills apart. So let me focus on conversational Japanese or Chinese, and then perhaps I will come to the writing later on. But by my holistic approach, or not mine, but the kind of holistic approach that I favor, I mean in the actual learning process, what I've often talked about, using methods like Assimil and Linguaphone and other sort of the natural methods that sort of plunge you into a language and give you a good representative chunk of it to digest and analyze and internalize, and then build up a working basis for that. And you do that, with the methods that I call shadowing and scriptorium, by reading and writing things out and going through it on a cyclical basis, and sort of not looking at an overall textbook, a conversational textbook of 100 lessons as something that I have to master and go on from stage to stage, but rather as something that I will sort of peel the onion with. I'll go over it many times, and each time I'll go a little deeper and I'll understand a little bit more. So that's, and if you do that kind of holistic approach, you are learning all of those things, reading, writing, speaking, and listening at the same time. But beyond that, I just kind of mean that, to me, language learning is learning the skills, learning the language is not the goal. That's the means, that's the method itself of sort of doing something with your mind, retraining your mind, reprogramming your mind, as I refer to it as, each language is kind of an operating system or a programming. And if you can reprogram your mind to work on other things, you're kind of taking control of your thought process. And so if you view language learning as that, not as I'm trying to get these skills, but language learning as, well, I'm going to take an hour or two a day, every day, and to devote that to, the cultivation of my mind, my soul, myself, and learning. And if I do that, if I value the sort of humanities type education in its old traditional formulation, then I need languages. And so languages are things that, open doors to me. And so I'm going to immerse myself in the languages for the sake of the languages, for the sake of my mind, for the sake of taking an hour or two a day of my life and cultivating myself with it. And so that's the approach that I take to languages, and from that, skills come.
Okay, so it sounds like at the heart of everything, there's this basic mindset shift that you're encouraging. Is there going to be no point, suppose someone has adopted this mindset shift, is there no point at which they might be, a year or so along in their study of German, and then realize, I'm trying to pick up some German books and read them, and I'm continually having to look up words and figure out what they mean. Is there no point at which, some sort of targeted focus, say, on learning some vocabulary or something like that is appropriate? How would you address, particular situations like that?
Well, the specific case you just indicated, if I'm trying to read German and I don't have a wide enough vocabulary to read German, then I need to read more German. And reading more German is going to give me a wider vocabulary. You're not sort of saying, I need more vocabulary and I'm going to learn German. And so these vocabulary lists and, sort of ideas of looking and finding sort of, it's a very intriguing idea to make a word frequency list and say, these are, if we can number them, these are the 3,000 most common words in a language, or the 6,000 most common words in a language. And if I knew those, then I would be able to start reading more easily. So I can see why somebody might think that, but I don't know. If you want to do that, to me, it's the best way to do that is by reading. So I think that a problem that people have is maybe when they try to read and the things they're wanting to read are too hard, not scaling back and reading simpler, easier things, thinking that I need to, build the vocabulary to read specifically what I want to do. And I think that I understand this mindset. I mean, if I'm learning Russian to read Dostoevsky, that's my goal, is to read Dostoevsky. I don't want to, read a Russian version of Donald Duck to start out with, or a translation of some children's book. But actually, if I can sort of swallow that pill and sort of say, well, a native speaker of a language learns his vocabulary by reading age appropriate stuff and getting older and getting to that point. And so I think that if you can say, well, I'm not going to try to jump right in and read this great work of literature that I don't have the vocabulary for. Maybe if I can work up to it by reading graded readers that have been simplified, or children's books until I get more vocabulary. I think that's a better approach.
Okay, then maybe to build on this conversation, you are a strong advocate of methods of self-study, of some of these textbooks like Assimil and others that favor studying on one's own at home. If we, for the sake of it, if we do continue talking about these 4 general language learning skills, it seems fairly clear how a self-study routine will help with reading and comprehension and so forth. But as far as the speaking component of learning a language, and as far as the writing in the sense of not just writing something out, but writing in exchange with other people, what do you recommend in that case? How does someone take the self-study skills they've accumulated and prepare for a conversation with a native speaker or sending emails back and forth? Is there something you can do at home by yourself to prepare yourself as much as possible for those experiences? Is it inevitable that at some point you just need to seek out those experiences? How does that work?
Well, yeah, what you just said, I think, is inevitable. You just have to sink or swim and get started doing those. But I think you can work up to them by active practice of doing them, which I wonder if people who, say, oh, I don't think I can do it. If you try to do it and you just keep doing it and you don't have anybody judging you, then you'll make a lot of mistakes at first. But if you're in and have the ability to speak aloud to yourself, or to try writing things out and look and sort of see better versions of it, or try to do it. I think if you start doing that a little bit, then you should be able to jump into that and sink or swim eventually.
So maybe as a final question, we've danced around talking about some particular skills, particular ways to target things, and each time you seem to emphasize once again this notion of a basic shift in mindset, a shift in approach that seems to undergird your notion of holistically approaching a language. This, maybe as a closing statement, could you reiterate that? What's the difference between how most people might approach a language, or how languages are usually taught, and this holistic notion of language learning that you're advocating?
Well, yeah, I guess languages are traditionally seen and taught as sort of, language X is going to be, the ability to speak language X, understand language X, write language X, and read language X. Precisely those 4 skills. If I can do those 4 skills, then I can say that I know language X, if I can do those. So it's sort of broken down into those and sort of built up. And so maybe you're taught that in school. Now we're teaching you vocabulary, we're teaching you grammar, we're teaching you these things. And I think that most people, when they imagine, for whatever reason, all of a sudden it becomes incumbent upon me I haven't thought of learning a foreign language before, but all of a sudden I feel a need or an interest in doing it. It's probably because I have a, practical desire to actually speak it, or go to the country, or travel there, or interact with the people, or something like that. So people come to the idea of learning a language as, I wish I had the skills to do these things that I don't have. And that's all, perfectly normal and understandable. But when you can see languages differently, sort of as objects of study, worthy of study in and of themselves, and as keys to culture, and as doors to diachronic learning and gateways to different literatures and the original languages. And more than any of that, too, as I said, that it just seems to me that we are under so much pressure in our contemporary lives to be all the time sort of interacting with some sort of device, and to take those devices and all the good that they do, but to put them aside for an hour a day and say, I want to be, focused on sort of learning in my head what I have in my head, writing something out, just training my mind, just looking at the fact that, I do feel that my intellect, my ability to focus, my memory are being slightly eroded by not taking enough time to work on cultivating my mind. And I think that's something that any, self-respecting, educated person would want to do, is to say, I should do some sort of form of mental exercise, the same way I do physical exercise to keep my body strong, and I try to do other things to take care of myself. I think that we need to take some sort of basic care of our minds. And to me, our minds work on language. Our minds are programmed to say things by words, and people have used different languages and different words. And so learning a variety of languages that come from different plans and places is a way of sort of taking control of your mind. And so just approaching, the languages, as we talked about in previous times, as sort of language families, and seeing them as interesting objects of study. Where do they fit on this tree, and how do they work? If I can go at it with all that attitude, I turn around and I'm able to do all these 4 skills. I get those in the bargain. And so it's not my goal when I set out to study languages, but I find that, if I spend any decent amount of time approaching languages the way, with the attitude that I just described, then when I turn around, if I have the opportunity to read a book in that language, to travel to that country, or have a conversation, I'm generally able to do it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're drawing a distinction between a mindset of acquiring another skill versus basically learning to navigate an entire world, becoming more familiar with almost a landscape of language and interconnected aspects of, frankly, human relationships, in a sense. Would that be one way of putting it?
That'd be a very good way of putting it. Yeah. That's quite nicely put. Yeah. I do see a true basic value in the humanities, the idea that knowledge is interconnected, and that things like, philosophical questions, theological questions, really knowing history, knowing what happened where and how things are connected and who people are, and knowing these things. That's just a big, that's a lifelong project, and you need to sort of weave this giant net behind you that can catch other bits and put them in their place when you get it. But, if you work at that and for your life, as by the time you get to be my age, a little bit older, you feel like you actually know something. It's very rewarding. And the main key to being able to do that is knowing the languages that things are written in. So, thanks for those prompting questions and that idea. And again, I always like to close by saying, if you're still watching my videos to the end, you enjoy listening to me speak and talk, please come interact with me in my academy. If you would like to take a trial class to see what they're like, please just ask, and we'll get you in. So thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week. Thank you.